He knocked my graduation cake straight off the table, and it landed with a wet thud on the patio stones. Frosting smeared across the ground, and the candles scattered, rolling beneath people's shoes. My 10-year-old nephew flashed a mischievous grin and shouted, "Eat it off the ground, Aunt Daisy!" The entire table burst into laughter. My mother's laugh rose above all the others. I stood there holding the knife I'd used to cut the first slice, wondering how affection in this family always seemed to come sharpened with an edge. I didn't say a single word. Instead, I turned around and walked away while their laughter spilled into the night behind me. Later, my phone lit up with a message from my mother. "We've decided to cut all contact, stay away for good." A moment later, I saw that my sister had liked it. I sent back one short sentence, and that was the moment everything shifted. The scene earlier that day could have been from a lifestyle magazine, glowing string lights, warm Idaho air, and the smell of grilled food drifting across the yard. From a distance, it looked like the perfect family moment. But standing there with a flimsy paper plate in my hand, I could feel the thin, uncomfortable tension just beneath the surface, the kind of tension everyone pretended not to notice. My mother, Linda, moved gracefully from guest to guest, wearing the polished smile she reserved for social gatherings. My sister, Amanda, sat right in the center of the crowd in a fresh floral dress, radiant and effortlessly admired. Her son, Liam, sat beside her like a small prince, soaking in the attention that had never once been directed toward me. Someone called out, asking about their recent trip to Florida. Amanda tossed her hair over her shoulder and laughed. "It was incredible. Mom insisted we stay an extra week." My mother dipped her head modestly. "Well, they work hard. They deserved it." I smiled, the kind of smile people give when they know it's expected, even though no one had bothered to ask how Seattle was treating me, or how it felt to finally earn my degree. Off to the side sat my cake, white frosting, blue letters spelling out, "Congratulations, Daisy." It had been pushed to the far corner of the table, crowded between paper plates and half-finished sodas. Every time someone brushed past, the cake shifted slightly, as though it didn't matter whether it stayed on the table at all. I kept looking at it longer than I meant to. Something about it felt too familiar, something lovely, overlooked, placed out of the way as if it didn't truly belong. A soft breeze moved through the yard, stirring the lights overhead. For just a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe things would be different this time. They weren't. Maybe a part of me still hoped they would surprise me. But that hope dissolved the moment Liam sprinted toward the table, eyes bright with the kind of mischief he'd learned from the adults around him. His voice carried across the yard, cutting through the comfortable chatter. "Aunt Daisy," he announced loudly. "Mom says you only got your degree so you can brag." The laughter that followed felt sharper than anything the cool evening air could deliver. My mother didn't correct him. Amanda lifted her wine glass to her mouth, pretending to hide the smile stretching across her face. In that moment, I thought of all the years I'd been told to give more, be patient, be understanding, to be the strong one, the quiet one, the one who didn't ask for anything. My throat tightened, but I forced the feeling down, like swallowing something bitter. Then Liam reached for the cake. His hand pushed it toward the edge, and everything seemed to slow. The porcelain plate tipped. It hit the ground with a crack, icing exploding across my shoes. Gasps rose for a heartbeat, then melted into laughter, louder this time. Almost gleeful. I stood motionless, still holding the knife I had been using to serve slices. No one told him to apologize. My father didn't even look up from his phone. The final thing I remember before walking away was my mother's voice, light and amused, as if nothing serious had happened. "Oh, come on, Daisy, don't be so sensitive." I set the knife down, untied the apron I'd worn to help serve food, and stepped toward the house. Each footstep echoed against the wooden deck. Too loud, too exposed. Their laughter trailed behind me like background noise from a celebration meant for someone else. Outside, the air felt colder. The sky had darkened to a deep, bruised blue. I got in my car and drove off without saying goodbye. For the first time in my life, there were no tears. Something inside me had finally cracked open, and I knew there was no way back to who I had been before that moment. I kept driving for hours, the headlights slicing through the empty Idaho highway. My fingers gripped the steering wheel until they ached. Their laughter replayed in my mind, the clinking of plates, the mocking tone in my mother's voice saying, "Don't be so sensitive." By the time I reached my apartment in Seattle, it was well past midnight. The city was quiet, rain sliding down the windows in thin streaks. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and let the silence settle around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. Then, my phone vibrated. For a breath, I let myself imagine that the message might be an apology, maybe a moment of regret, or even a question asking if I made it home safely. Instead, the words were cold and precise, too calm to be impulsive, too final to misunderstand. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away forever." A few seconds later, a small red heart appeared beside the message, Amanda's silent approval. I stared at the phone, my faint reflection shining in the screen's glow. My chest didn't clench, and no tears came. It felt as though my body had finally grown tired of proving it could still hurt. All that remained was a quiet, heavy stillness. I reached for my laptop. The blue light filled the room as it woke, illuminating a familiar spreadsheet, my old budget tracker. 2 lines sat near the top of the page, waiting like accusations. Parents' mortgage, $400 monthly. Amanda's SUV, $640 monthly. Both loans carried my signature. Both payments had been pulled automatically from my account for 3 years. I had co-signed because my mother had smiled sweetly and said, "You're the responsible one, honey. Just help the family out." Back then, I mistook that for affection. Now, staring at the numbers, it looked more like a chain I had willingly clasped around my own wrists. Rain tapped harder against the window, irregular and restless, almost like a countdown to something I couldn't avoid anymore. I scrolled through old messages, polite thank yous, guilt-dipped reminders, soft excuses, just until Amanda's business picks up. "Your dad's between jobs again. We'll take over the payments next month." But next month had never arrived. Something inside me shifted, no longer grief, but a sharp and startling clarity. I opened a new message and typed slowly, each keystroke calm and controlled. "Removing my name from every loan tomorrow. No emojis. No justification. Just a fact." I hit send. The phone chimed once and then grew still. I turned it face down on the table. Outside, the rain faded into a gentler rhythm. I poured myself a glass of water and watched the condensation trail down its sides. The silence in my apartment didn't feel like defeat anymore. It felt like a door locking from the inside, keeping my peace safe for once. They wanted distance, fine. But this time, they were the ones who would feel what it meant. Morning arrived wrapped in a dull, gray Seattle haze. The kind of dawn that makes the world look rinsed clean. I brewed my coffee and watched the steam curl upward, thinking about how easily things end, not with dramatic arguments, but with a single message typed at 2 a.m. I hadn't slept, but I felt strangely alert. The exhaustion had burned itself out, leaving behind a steady calm I didn't expect. By 9 o'clock, my phone started buzzing non-stop. My phone lit up with a flood of notifications: Mom, Dad, Amanda, and several numbers I didn't recognize from Boise. By the time I checked the screen, there were more than 100 missed calls. The family group chat was unraveling into panicked messages, demands, accusations, guilt-soaked threats. "You've gone too far. Do you have any idea what you're doing to us? We raised you." Not one message contained the words, "I'm sorry." I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I pulled on a gray sweater, tied my hair back, and opened my laptop. I sat there for a moment, breathing slowly, before typing the name of the bank into the search bar. Green First Bank, downtown Seattle branch. By late morning, I was sitting in a quiet consultation room painted a soft blue, with a single fern in the corner trying its best to look alive. Mr. Diaz, a man in his 50s with gentle eyes behind thin wire-rimmed glasses, shook my hand as he entered. "Miss Wilson," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I reviewed the documents you uploaded last night. I believe I understand your situation." I folded my hands together to steady them. "I co-signed 2 loans, my parents' mortgage and my sister's SUV. I've been making the payments for years. I want to be removed from both." He nodded slowly, compassion softening his features. "You'd be surprised how often this happens under the banner of family." He pushed a small stack of papers toward me. If you can verify that you have no ownership or financial interest in either property, we can start the liability release. You can also freeze any joint credit access. I opened the folder I'd brought. Inside were my lease agreements, pay stubs, printed email threads, and even an old message from my mother that said, "The house is ours, you just helped sign." Mr. Diaz read the documents quietly, then looked up with certainty. "This is everything we need." He picked up the phone and called the legal department. His voice was firm, direct, unshakable. "Let's begin the release process for Daisy Wilson. Co-borrower removal effective immediately." The small click of his pen as he prepared the form sounded almost insignificant, but to me it felt like a fault line splitting open beneath my feet. My hands shook as I signed each page. With every signature, I felt another expectation, another obligation, another invisible weight fall away. When he pressed the final stamp onto the paper, the soft thud echoed through the room like a closing chapter. Mr. Diaz slid the documents back toward me, his expression warm and steady. "You made the right decision, Miss Wilson," he said gently. "And for the first time in years, I believed someone. Sometimes the only way to teach people how to treat you is by finally choosing to protect yourself." When I stepped outside the bank, the wind stung my cheeks, but my chest felt lighter than it had in years, hollow in the best possible way, as if something heavy had finally slid off my ribs. I stopped at a small cafe on the corner. The barista handed me a cappuccino and offered a warm, casual smile. "Have a good day." For the first time in a long time, I met someone's eyes and answered honestly, "I will." That evening, I stood in my tiny kitchen stirring pasta when my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with the family group chat, overflowing with outrage. "How dare you ruin our credit? You're heartless. You'll regret this." I typed a single calm sentence. I just stopped paying for people who laughed when my cake hit the floor. I hit send and set the phone down. The silence that followed didn't feel empty, it felt earned. It felt like freedom. 3 days passed before the knock came. It wasn't a polite tap. It was furious, loud, sharp, relentless, each hit rattling through the thin walls of my Seattle apartment. I stood frozen, the pot of boiling pasta sputtering behind me, an uneasy certainty curling in my stomach before I even looked at the intercom. On the video screen were two faces I knew better than my own. My mother and Amanda stood in the hallway, their expressions twisted with anger. Mom's mouth was compressed into a hard line, her arms crossed like she was stepping into a courtroom. Amanda's eyes were blotchy and red, her medical mask hanging crookedly around her neck. "Daisy!" My mother's voice pierced through the speaker high, trembling with rage. "Open this door right now. We need to talk. What did you do with the bank?" I didn't move. The hallway camera showed them shifting anxiously, aware that neighbors were peeking from their doors. Amanda's voice broke through next shrill, cracking under the weight of panic. "You ruined everything. The bank froze our accounts. Mom's credit is gone." Amanda's voice rose again, sharp and frantic. "My car is about to be repossessed. You think this is funny?" Funny. The word struck me not because of the accusation, but because it was the role they had always assigned me. The joke. The one who didn't break. The one who wasn't allowed to hurt. I drew in a steady breath and opened the voice recorder on my phone. Then, with a calmness that felt unfamiliar but solid, I tapped the emergency call shortcut. "This is the Seattle Police Department." A quiet prompt whispered through the speaker. I spoke softly into the app. "2 individuals are outside my apartment, yelling and refusing to leave. I'd like to report trespassing." "Do you know them?" the dispatcher asked. "Yes," I said, watching their distorted faces on the monitor. "They're my family, but today they're just people violating my boundaries." Outside, the pounding on the door intensified. Amanda's hand struck the wood hard enough to rattle the frame. "You're destroying this family, Daisy," she screamed. "You think cutting us off makes you strong? You're selfish, heartless." My mother's voice followed, trembling between rage and fear. "We're your parents! You don't treat family like enemies." 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across the street. Through the intercom, I watched as 2 officers, 1 man, 1 woman, walked calmly toward my mother and sister. Mom rushed at them immediately, her arms waving in frantic arcs as she pointed at my door. "She's my daughter! She ruined our finances. We just want to talk to her. Amanda's words spilled out in panicked sobs. She almost cost me my car. My fiancé is threatening to leave me because of her credit. She's heartless. The male officer lifted a hand to stop the avalanche of accusations. Ma'am, this is private property. If she asks you to leave, you need to leave. She's my child, my mother shot back. I have rights. He shook his head gently. You have rights as a parent, but not the right to trespass on an adult's home. On the screen, Amanda stepped back, her frustration tightening her features. For a brief moment, guilt brushed against me, soft, familiar, persistent. But the memory rose again. Frosting smeared across the pavement, their laughter rising over my humiliation, the cold dismissal that followed. Not this time. I leaned toward the intercom, speaking clearly, but quietly. If they behave like intruders, then the line between family and boundary doesn't exist anymore. The officer turned toward the camera and gave a small, understanding nod, as though no further explanation was needed. Then he gestured toward the stairwell. This conversation is over. Let's go. My mother faced the door once more, her eyes burning with betrayal. You'll regret this, Daisy. Blood doesn't disappear because you say so. I didn't answer. The lock stayed firm between us. As they finally walked away, their footsteps echoed down the stairs heavy, defeated, fading into nothing. The flashing lights dimmed, then vanished. When silence settled over the apartment again, it felt like air filling a room that had been shut tight for years. I slid down to the floor and leaned against the wall, the phone still recording beside me. My hands trembled not from fear, but from release. Their voices continued in the background for a moment, pleading, angry, familiar. I saved the file and titled it, Boundaries, April 18, 2025. That night, I stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath me. Headlights streaked across wet asphalt as cars moved like quiet rivers, people laughing, ordering coffee, living lives that had nothing to do with mine. And in that small apartment above it all, a family had quietly unraveled, no shouting, no spectacle, just a fracture that would never quite heal. The next morning, my inbox overflowed with messages I hadn't expected. A Facebook post from my mother glared at me in bold, all-caps letters. Sometimes, the child you trust most betrays you the worst. Daisy stole from her parents and ruined our credit. Some people never learn gratitude. Below it, a cascade of comments, neighbors, relatives, even people I barely remembered. So ungrateful. Poor Linda, after everything she's done. And one that stung the most. I heard she used her parents' money to buy that apartment in Seattle. The old me would have panicked. I would have written long defenses, begged for understanding, pleaded for trust. But now, I simply exhaled. They were throwing fire. I refused to burn. I opened a new email. Careful, measured, professional. Subject, clarification, personal matter. Hi team. If you see rumors about me online, please disregard them. Some people respond to boundaries with lies. I am fine and appreciate your professionalism and respect for privacy. Daisy. I closed the laptop. Truth rarely needs shouting. It only needs time. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at my office. The letterhead read, Green First Bank. Inside, a document bore Mr. Diaz's signature. This letter confirms that Miss Daisy Wilson has been fully released from all liabilities concerning the joint mortgage and vehicle loan under the names of Linda and Amanda Wilson. The gold seal at the bottom shimmered in the light. I brushed my fingers over the paper, tracing the curve of my signature the moment everything changed. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. That evening, the Facebook post vanished. Maybe someone had told my mother the truth. Maybe the bank had called to confirm. I didn't care. The damage no longer mattered because I had stopped living for their approval. Still, my phone buzzed. A message from a number I hadn't saved in months. You'll pay for this, Daisy. You think you've won? I smiled faintly. Winning wasn't the point. Freedom was. I stood by the window, the Seattle skyline stretching out like a map of second chances. The air was sharp with coffee and rain, clean and new. For the first time, I felt unchained. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's what power sounds like once it finally learns to speak for itself. Weeks passed, and the noise surrounding my life slowly dissolved. No more late-night calls. No more whispered accusations drifting through Facebook threads. The quiet that once felt like a threat now settled around me like a blanket. Peaceful, steady, mine. I poured my energy into my work at Green Pulse Tech, finishing a project that ended up earning me a quiet promotion. During a meeting, Lydia, our CEO, looked at me and said, "Daisy, you lead with steadiness. People trust that." It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to me without expectation, without strings tied to sacrifice. Life at home found its own gentle rhythm. Mornings began with yoga at sunrise. Evenings were filled with simmering soup and soft playlists. I laughed with friends who saw me not what I could do for them. Elena brought flowers just because. One weekend, Marcus teased me about the cactus on my windowsill, claiming, "It looks like me, calm, but don't touch." I laughed harder than I expected. Then, one morning, a message appeared from Mr. Diaz. Attached was a photo of my release document, framed and hanging in the bank's compliance office. "We use it as an example of boundary protection," he wrote. I smiled and took a slow sip of coffee by the window. For the first time in my life, I wasn't someone's safety net or their silent backbone. I was simply Daisy, whole, free, and living a life that belonged entirely to me. A year later, my phone lit up with a message from Amanda. Just 6 quiet words. "I'm sorry for everything." No excuses, no explanations, just an apology that arrived late but honest. I looked at it for a long moment before setting the phone down. I didn't reply. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always require reopening the door. Sometimes it means closing it gently and walking forward with peace. Outside, Lake Union shimmered beneath the evening light, calm and endless. I breathed in the cool Seattle air, alive with possibility, and whispered to myself, "Welcome home, Daisy." If you've ever had to cut ties to become yourself again, you're not alone. Share your story below and subscribe for the next chapter.